Now, one person who was very prominent in this campaign was Rowan Atkinson, and he spoke about it at a news conference, or at a conference, on the 16th of October 2012. I'm just going to show you some extracts from it.
My starting point when it comes to the consideration of any issue relating to free speech is my passionate belief that the second most precious thing in life is the right to express yourself freely. The most precious thing in life, I think, is food in your mouth, and the third most precious is a roof over your head. But a fixture for me in the number 2 slot is free expression, just below the need to sustain life itself. That is because I have enjoyed free expression in this country all my professional life, and fully expect to continue to do so. So my concerns are less for myself and more for those more vulnerable because of their lower profile. Like the man arrested in Oxford for calling a police horse gay, or the teenager arrested for calling the Church of Scientology a cult, or the cafe owner arrested for displaying passages from the Bible on a TV screen. When I heard of some of these more ludicrous offences and charges, I remembered that I had been here before in a fictional context. I once did a show called Not the 9 O'Clock News some years ago, and we did a sketch where Griff Rhys-Jones played Constable Savage, a manifestly racist police officer to whom I, as his station commander, is giving a dressing down for arresting a black man on a whole string of ridiculous, trumped-up and ludicrous charges. The charges for which Constable Savage arrested Mr. Winston Kadogo of 55 Mercer Road were these: walking on the cracks in the pavement, walking in a loud shirt in a built-up area during the hours of darkness, and one of my favourites, walking around all over the place. He was also arrested for urinating in a public convenience and looking at me in a funny way. Who would have thought that we would end up with a law that would allow life to imitate art so exactly? I read somewhere a defender of the status quo claiming that the fact that the gay horse case was dropped after the arrested man refused to pay the fine, and that the Scientology case was also dropped at some point during the court process, was proof that the law was working well, ignoring the fact that the only reason these cases were dropped was because of the publicity that they had attracted. The police sensed that ridicule was just around the corner and withdrew their actions. But what about the thousands of other cases that did not enjoy the oxygen of publicity, that weren't quite ludicrous enough to attract media attention? Even for those actions that were withdrawn, people were arrested, questioned, taken to court, and then released. You know, that isn't a law working properly. That is censoriousness of the most intimidating kind, guaranteed to have, as Lord Dear says, a chilling effect on free expression and free protest. Merely stating an alternative point of view to the orthodoxy can be interpreted as insult. A new but intense desire to gag uncomfortable voices of dissent. The best way to increase society's resistance to insulting or offensive speech is to allow a lot more of it.
Now, anyone remember seeing that on mainstream news? Why didn't they have their reporters there? And just one point, who would you rather have as next Prime Minister? Mr. Bean gets my vote every time. And I'm going to come on to that in a second. So what happened was there was a vote in the House of Lords, and they voted quite strongly to get rid of that word insulting because of this campaign, 150 to 54. And the government didn't oppose it. They just let it sail through, and I think they were probably aware that if they had opposed it, they would have been ridiculed by the likes of Rowan Atkinson, because it is a ridiculous law. All right? So that came into force on the 1st of February 2014, and I suspect the government weren't happy about having to change that law, because it takes away police powers of arrest. It says that you can shout things out at people if you want to, as long as it's not abusive, if it's just insulting. Now, I'm just going to write Rowan Atkinson's name next to him there. 2 months after that law was changed, right, and I think Rowan Atkinson was probably instrumental in that happening, someone with his influence and following, this newspaper headline appeared. Now, this story, right, it turned out was completely false. There was not an element of truth in it, that these giant rats had been discovered somewhere in the UK. So this is a total lie. In my opinion, the main thing that's going on in this front page is Rowan Atkinson, and that story's been put there as a subliminal, right? Rowan Atkinson, right? Look at the way that the tail is hanging down from his neck. You might ask, well, why would they do that on the front page of a newspaper? If you think about news, it is a bit more fragmented than it used to be. You have got a lot of channels on Sky, you've got the internet, but one place that still has millions of captured viewers is newspaper stands. So if 1 million people have bought that newspaper, I would suggest 10 million people have read the front page. So you've still got a vast amount of people looking at that, and that goes straight into your subconscious, right? In my opinion, this is a subconscious attempt to nudge the public to a place where they don't really approve of Rowan Atkinson. Because can you imagine Rowan Atkinson in a debate with Ed Miliband or David Cameron? You know, he was very statesmanlike in that clip, wasn't he? He was speaking from his heart. Just compare that to Miliband, the clip that I showed you. They do not want their puppets upstaged by an intelligent, witty man like Rowan Atkinson. So this is manipulation of the worst kind, in my opinion. Subconscious planting of suggestion. Okay. Here's another subliminal. This is a Kate McCann subliminal, or McCann story. So the bottom right hand corner there is a separate advert, and it's for the Financial Services Authority. Why the Financial Services Authority need to advertise in the first place, I don't know. But they've chosen to put the title of their advert as The Truth, right under where it says Missing Madeline and Mum Kate. I don't think that's an accident. Okay, now, after that law changed, round about 7 or 8 months after, these ridiculous stories about modern-day slavery started appearing in our press. And they're all bogus, in my opinion. They're all exaggerations and concoctions. It's a Hegelian dialectic. So they're creating a problem, then a reaction, and then they're going to come up with a solution. And the solution is to bring in a new law, which I'm going to explain to you. But they've got to get these stories in the media first before they bring in this draconian new law. One story caught my eye as a classic, contrived Hegelian dialectic problem-reaction-solution farce. The story of 3 women rescued from a house in Lambeth after allegedly being held as slaves for 30 years. This story was put out by most, if not all, of our gutter press. The BBC website said, a Malaysian woman, 69, an Irish woman, 57, and a Briton, 30, were rescued on the 25th of October. It emerged on Thursday. A man, 73, and a woman, 67, understood to be married, were arrested in Lambeth and later bailed until January. The Home Secretary, Theresa May, said details were still emerging in Lambeth, South London, but it was clear that many other victims were hidden in plain sight across the country. It transpired that one of these so-called slaves had been working, wait for it, drum roll, in a nail bar. I'm enslaved in a nail bar, please let me out. I can assure you a nail bar is not the sort of place I would want to be enslaved in either. I spent 30 years imprisoned against my will. Oh really? Where did you do your time? Wandsworth nail bar. Really? The screws are really cruel in them nail bars. They only allow 5-minute fag breaks, and you have to stick to set fingernail designs. There is just no artistic freedom there. If a person abuses another person, do we not already have laws that deal with this? Theresa May then starts going on saying that we need to deal with modern-day slavery by inventing new laws. Thousands of Geordie men will be getting locked up for being heard to utter the forbidden words. Make me a cup of tea, pet. I then saw a psychologist being interviewed talking about how charismatic people with strong personalities can start cults with the aim of enslaving people and how we need to protect ourselves against them. So that's what this is all about. Controlling people who spread ideology, or perhaps even the truth. This farcical story shows just how scared the manipulators are of certain ideas which are growing in the public mindset. Ideas that are based on truth. That's it. The truth is the greatest enemy of the state. And this applies to the UK right here, right now. New laws to clamp down on modern-day slavery are being laid down to stamp out the enemy of the state, the truth. All right, so there was a number of completely ridiculous stories about supposed modern-day slavery, and then just very recently we had the Queen's speech.
A bill will be introduced to strengthen the powers to prevent modern slavery and human trafficking, while improving support for victims of such crimes.
So they've planted their bogus stories, they've created a bit of interest in it, and now the Queen is saying we need new laws, and they're intending to bring these new laws in the next Parliament. Now, one thing that tells me is that the manipulators who are orchestrating all this, operating with the Crown, the government and the media, all as one, right? Because they need all three in order to be able to bring in what I'm going to describe to you in a second. Now, there are two draft slavery bills, which these are proposed as going to be new laws. There's the government draft slavery bill and there's the joint committee draft bill. They both define what they mean by slavery and what they're going to make illegal. Now, the top one is the government one, the second one is the joint committee one. I'm going to selectively read the joint committee one. For the purposes of this Act, slavery means the control by a person of a second person in such a way as by which any person obtains a benefit through the use, management, profit, transfer or disposal of that second person. If I ask anyone in this audience to go to the bar and get me a pint of lager and I'll give you the money and you give me it, I've broken the law. I've broken that law. That is a law against having someone do you a favour. That's what that is. Now, this one's not quite as bad, but neither of these laws talk about whether the person has agreed to do that favour. So they're making the doing of favours or requesting a favour illegal. That's what they're trying to do. This one says P requires another person to perform forced or compulsory labour and the circumstances are such that P knows or ought to know that the person is being required to perform forced or compulsory labour. I mean, that's just completely ambiguous and I don't see how it's enforceable. I can envisage situations in 3 or 4 years' time where you might have a married couple or two friends or any sort of club where they fall out. People fall out in their day-to-day lives, yeah? So they think, all those favours I did for them, is that the police? I've been enslaved for the last 3 years. The courts are going to be full, right? Now, I ran a campaign in 2012 called Tell Your MP about 7/7, where 100 people went on my website, they downloaded some documents and printed them out and took them to their MPs. They could have me locked up for doing that if this law is passed. This is a very, very dangerous law. It's trying to make requesting favours from someone illegal. And in a place like here, the Welsh Valleys, where there is a very good community spirit, I find, people will help you and will not request payment. What's it going to do? Every time you want someone to do something or communicating with someone, you're going to be scared to ask them to do something. That's going to erode trust, isn't it? In the cement which holds us all together. Do we really want this? Because we've got laws, we've got employment law, right? We've got minimum wage. So they're not talking about employment here. Right? And they're not talking about shackling someone in traditional type slavery. They're talking about what they mean by mental slavery. Sorry, what they mean by modern slavery. They mean mental slavery. They're saying we're going to try and control what you can say to someone. So they're limiting your freedom of expression. And this is very, very dangerous. Now, I've written to my MP to complain about this. I do not want this law passed. And I was going to ask you lot to do the same, but I'm not sure now because I might get done for enslaving you. But just think about the implications of this law. This, in my opinion, is not being brought in to stop people being taken advantage of. It's the opposite. It's a Yuri Bezmenov subversion technique, and it will have a very detrimental effect on society.